The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome to a special edition of Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. I'm Woody Evans, and we're pleased to have a special guest with us today, Dr. Timothy Sands, Virginia Tech.
Hi, Woody. Thanks for having me.
Now, you are a new president, relatively speaking, to Virginia Tech. Tell us a little bit about your background and experience and what brought you to Virginia Tech.
Well, most recently, I was at Purdue University as a provost and an acting president for 6 months between Franz Cordova and Mitch Daniels, the former governor of Indiana. And that experience opened me up to the idea of possibly becoming a university president. And I was interested in the land-grant model, and Purdue is a land-grant. And when I looked around the country at the opportunities, Virginia Tech just stood out. It happened that Virginia Tech had a very successful and long-standing president, Charles Steger, and he had announced his retirement. I started to get to know the university, and the more I got to know it, the more I saw the alignment between Virginia Tech's values and my own. And it just one of those things. It just worked out. Everything fell into place, and here I am.
Now, that land grant designation is a result of a federal law, is it not, back in the 1800s?
1862, the Morrill Act that President Lincoln signed, and it really gave a charter to universities across the country in each state to have a two-part mission. One was to prepare students from all backgrounds to participate in our democracy. So it had a liberal education component to it, a military tactics component, and it really was about taking, let's call it the average citizen or average student, and turning them into a productive citizen. And the other part was economic development. They didn't call it economic development in 1862, but essentially that was it. So when you think of what the economy was based on back then, it was essentially the Industrial Revolution and agriculture. And so those became agriculture and the mechanic arts, which are literally spelled out in the Morrill Act. And that was, Virginia Tech was formed right along with that model. And it's evolved, of course, over the years, but it stuck to those two missions of access and preparing students for participation in our democracy and economic development.
Talk to us about your student body and your faculty, especially in terms of the diversity they bring.
Well, we've got 31,000 students from all over the world. Most of them are in Blacksburg, but we have students, especially graduate students, scattered about the Commonwealth and really about the world. It is a diverse community, but becoming much more diverse. I think looking forward, the demographics suggest that Virginia Tech is going to become very diverse over the next, I would say, decade or so. And that's really created a focus on creating an inclusive environment. But it is already a wonderful place to experience. Students who come onto campus are prospective students, and their parents and partners are, I think, amazed by the diversity we already have. And of course, there's a diversity of expertise and disciplines. It's very rich at Virginia Tech. It certainly has a land-grant feel to it because you see the agriculture, you see the engineering, but you also have very strong arts, humanities, social sciences, and most recently the arts, as well as a medical school. So it's changing fast. It's a very dynamic place. I like to think that it's evolving quickly to meet the needs of the world around it in order to stay in place with respect to the mission that it originally was created under, the Morrill Act.
Now, we're here in the basement of the General Assembly in Richmond, Virginia today. What brings you to Richmond?
It is the General Assembly session, and it's an opportunity for the universities and really all of our constituents in Virginia to come in and make their case. And of course, we're here to talk about several issues that affect higher education and to build some relationships, because the partnership with the state is critical to Virginia Tech. We need to have that constant dialogue. And the fact that we have a session like this where everyone's so concentrated and we bump into people in the hallways, and every little slice of Virginia is here, the various interest groups, everybody should experience it. It's incredibly dynamic, fun experience, sometimes frustrating, but for the most part it's a very positive experience. We need to be here to talk about higher ed and what we do for the state.
Now, to what extent has public funding eroded over the years?
That's a good question. I think if you look at Virginia Tech, we're down about 50% in real dollars in state support per student since 2000. And 2000 was a peak year, but I would say a better figure maybe we're down by about a third over the last 15 years or so. And that has put pressure on tuition and caused us to become more efficient, which is not a bad thing. But it does mean that we are engaging more private philanthropy to support the public mission, which I think is an interesting place to be in going forward. We have quite a few donors and friends who recognize the importance of the public mission of Virginia Tech and who think it's worth supporting with private dollars. So that's something we're going to have to build on, because the state hasn't had the money to invest in Virginia Tech that it did maybe 15, 20, 30 years ago. And we think the mission is so important that we can't just let it shrink. In fact, we want it to grow. So we're in a process of looking at what we can do to serve in-state students more than we have in the past. Demand is growing. We have more applications this year than we've ever had for undergraduate programs. And we've got several graduate programs that are taking off. So it's exciting times. We're growing as a university at the same time that the support for the university from a financial standpoint is becoming more diverse. Let's say that. It's not, the public is not funding the public good like it used to, like 30 or 40 years ago.
Not unlike the Commonwealth, which is in the process of diversifying its economy,
Yes.
because the reliance on the federal government cannot be counted on anymore.
Very similar.
Talk to us about the ability to retain and attract new faculty as a result of these funding problems.
That's probably our number one threat, is maintaining our talent amongst the faculty and the staff. We compete in a global market, certainly a national market, but in some cases global, for talent. And so the fact that our salaries are lower than our peers by about 10% on average presents a special challenge for us. We always, of course, have to go to the market in order to recruit people, but the challenge is to retain them. And we have a lot of faculty who are very successful at Virginia Tech and who are sought after by institutions around the world. So we're in a constant battle to keep that talent in the state and at Virginia Tech. We do prioritize compensation. It's not the only thing. Matter of fact, if you talk to a faculty member, they're going to want to be around people who are dynamic, who are intelligent, who are interested in making a difference, and they want to be in a community like that. And we have a community like that, but in order to maintain that, you have to keep individuals in place. And losing someone who you've invested in for 5 or 10 years is very expensive. That's much more expensive than trying to retain them. So I would say among all the issues we have, that's the one that is probably the biggest threat and the one we're most definitely focused on. And we've, I think, met some positive reception for that concern. Matter of fact, Chev, the governing council, if you will, for higher education in the Commonwealth, has been supportive and recognizes the need for that. But we're trying to make that case as well. There's I think, a misconception that for our faculty and including some of our staff, that we compete within the state for people and that that's the marketplace, but it actually isn't true. We do not compete with UVA, for example, University of Virginia, for faculty. We have very different missions, and for the most part we're competing globally with other similar institutions to Virginia Tech.
Now, in terms of your international outreach, do you have associations or sites in other countries? We
do. We have one long-standing facility in Switzerland that's recently been upgraded in Riva San Vitale, which is the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. It's primarily an opportunity for study abroad. We run a number of our programs out of the Riva site, and it's a great experience. The students come back transformed. They can go anywhere in Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, from that site because of its central location. And they earn credits, Virginia Tech credits, while they're there. It's a very productive experience, expensive for the student, and that's something we're working on. But what a great experience. We have a research facility in Chennai, in India, focused on energy, and that's early days for that. It's just starting. We certainly have people around the world. Our land-grant mission is a global one, from the agricultural part, essentially feeding. We've got to focus on this problem of feeding the planet. We're talking about 9 billion people by 2050, and we're going to have to use every scrap of land we can as efficiently as we can, and Virginia Tech is very much involved in that.
Talk to us about some of the disciplines you provide in terms of curriculum at the undergraduate level.
Well, it's really interesting. I think someone who, from our generation, who would go back and explore Virginia Tech, and many people do because their sons or daughters are going to Virginia Tech, or grandkids, they would see something that looks at the face of it very familiar, but then if they got into details and started looking at the curriculum, they would, I think, be frankly surprised at how it's evolved. It's hands-on, minds-on, so there's an experiential part to everything we do, and that's a signature of Virginia Tech, and really something that I think serves our students very well, so that they can practice what they're learning in a real-world experience while they're a college student. And then the residential experience is very rich now. When I was a student at a residential university back in the 70s, I studied and I went to class, and I did a few other odds and ends, but our students are deeply engaged in everything they do, whether it be class or student organizations or getting out into the community. And I think it's a much richer experience that they're having. And then the disciplines have also changed. The opportunities have changed. We're focused on interdisciplinary opportunities. We have been for at least 15 years at the research level, informing our research institutes. That's percolated down into the graduate programs and most recently into the undergraduate programs. So a student can come to Virginia Tech now and major in water policy resource management. And so you think, well, what, majoring in water, can you explain that to your parents? Well, a student can look at I think what's happening in the world, especially in the U.S., and what our future is going to be like in terms of water. And any kind of experience one can have sort of merging the science, the policy, the management parts, and the politics, essentially, of water. Those students are going to be incredibly valuable in the marketplace. They're going to be positioned to address this huge challenge for the country and for the world. So I'm really excited about the kinds of the neuroscience, nanoscience. We've got a major in real estate. It has 6 colleges involved in it. So it's not just in one program. It's spread out. It's a collaboration among 6 colleges. It's not about training real estate agents. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's about the broader issues associated with real estate. And that is proving very popular. Some of our best students are gravitating to that major because they see what they can do with it afterwards. And so I have to commend the faculty and staff of Virginia Tech and the students for having the foresight and really the courage to go off in these new directions, create these 21st century programs that are not maybe what you or I would recognize as familiar, but if you think about what's best for our students and for the country, having those kind of opportunities, preparing students in these broad grand challenge areas, I think is going to be tremendous. Of course, you have to have depth in your discipline, but connecting, you can be a water science expert, but then understanding the policy of water is and the political implications of water is a whole other level, and will make them, I think, put them in a position where they can have very productive and careers in service to the country.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of those exciting research initiatives that the university is involved in. I know you've got something going on in terms of robotics and drones. Talk to us about those.
Well, robotics has been a strength at Virginia Tech for many, many years, decades really. And I'm new to Virginia Tech. I've been there 8 months, but I certainly knew about what Virginia Tech was doing in that area before I came. I've been stunned by what I've seen so far. I got a chance to see the robotics lab and some of the demos that they do, focusing on robots that have the ability to restore their balance. Essentially, they have programmed in balance. It's in a very natural way. So you can push on a robot and it responds by catching its balance and restoring it. Those are the kinds of breakthroughs that will eventually lead to practical applications of robots. Not that there are not many applications now, but if you think about what you could do with robotics as you create robots that essentially operate a little bit like a human, because most of our built infrastructure is built for humans. So if you have a robot that can navigate the same spaces that a human can navigate, then you're talking about disaster response, things that you wouldn't want to send a human into an environment that is at risk of a roof collapse or whatever it may be, or where there's debris everywhere. So the more we develop robotics, I think the more that we make them natural, the more likely that we'll be in a position where robots will be a critical part of life-saving and many other areas. Similar for drones, we call them unmanned aerial systems, but of course there are privacy issues with drones and UAS. There are safety issues in terms of integrating them into the airspace. But the economic development opportunities are tremendous, and that's the balance we have to strike, and that's where we want to make sure that our scientists and engineers who work on unmanned aerial systems are also aware of the implications, the policy issues, the privacy issues, and can speak to those points when they're in a conversation with one of our representatives or with someone from the community. And it's about having a well-rounded education. I think we're in the midst of doing that. But the UAS thing is, we're a lead on a collaboration called MAP, which essentially Mid-Atlantic region, where we've got an FAA test site opportunity, and we're exploiting that to look into some of these issues about how can we safely integrate unmanned aerial systems into our airspace. Besides the privacy issues, there are a lot of issues associated with coordinating with what we already have in that airspace, and that's a particularly sweet spot for Virginia Tech, because we've had so much effort in transportation. Our Virginia Tech Transportation Institute is taking the technologies that are being cooked up by all sorts of companies and labs and testing out the human factors component of that. And with that, since we've had that long-standing expertise that has developed over the decades in transportation, we're now applying that to unmanned aerial systems. We're also looking at connected vehicles, and the more we get into that space toward autonomous vehicles, you start to get connections with robotics, you get connections with the human factors. So it's I feel like Virginia Tech really is in that invent the future mode that we claim to be. It's if you spend time on campus, you quickly get this feeling that you are in the forefront of all this, not only in these technology areas, but in bridging science and technology with arts and design, which is another area of emphasis at Virginia Tech.
Now you mentioned nanotechnology, and I believe that's the manufacture of very small things, correct? Talk to us about what's going on in that arena.
Well, it's interesting. I am a nanotechnologist. I guess that's probably the best description of my own technical career. I've been doing it for decades and been very involved in my time at Berkeley and at Bell Communications Research and more recently at Purdue in nanotechnology. So I'm becoming familiar with what Virginia Tech is doing in that area, and it's much more than I recognized from the outside. It's been an emphasis at Virginia Tech for many years, and it's such a great frontier because what you're talking about is you are making things small, and that's what people think of. Matter of fact, people ask to see things I would make. Well, I need to give you a microscope to see them, and often an optical microscope won't do. I've got to give you an electron microscope or something that, atomic force microscope, something that can see things just a little bigger than an atom and maybe smaller than what your eye can resolve. But the real excitement around nanotechnology has to do with the properties of materials, of objects, living or not, when they get down into that scale of nanometers, and they become different than the same material, let's say, that is at the bulk scale. The properties are very different. So it's like you have a few more knobs to turn, and it is having a pervasive impact on almost everything we do. You can't see it, but you can see the results.
Now you also have a research institute associated with the medical college in Roanoke, Virginia, do you not?
That's right. That's right. The Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine and Research Institute are coordinated. They actually occupy the same space. So we've got a School of Medicine that's a very a new School of Medicine. It just graduated its first class in May. Very successful, a lot of application demand. Focused, it has a research component to it, so all the School of Medicine students have a research experience, and it's focused on interprofessional training. So we bring together the various medical disciplines and they work together as a team as part of their curriculum. And then next to that, we've got the Research Institute, which is new also. It's 7 years old or so, but already phenomenal success. There are two areas I would call out. One is the science itself, and the other is its impact on the city of Roanoke, which it's brought in a lot of talent and a lot of energy to Roanoke, that and the School of Medicine. And it's this partnership with Carilion Clinic that's really clicked for us, because we've taken an existing health system, a really large clinic serving that part of Virginia, and combined it with our research institution and created this, I think it's kind of magic that's happening there. It's a little under the radar, although you're starting to see some of the work that's coming out of the Research Institute featured in the lay press, because it has huge impact. Neuroeconomics is one area that I think is phenomenal. This being able to diagnose autism, where you are on the autism spectrum, with a very quick diagnosis using MRI, functional MRI. Lots of really practical, high-impact medical research going on in that institute. And it's early days, bringing in talent globally, but it's setting itself up for great success in the future.
So I understand there is a lot of research focused on the brain, for example, there. And is it Michael Friedlander who's heading that effort?
Michael Friedlander directs the Research Institute, and he has brought incredible talent and energy to that Research Institute. We have people from all over the world who are experts in brain injury and addictive behavior, in I mentioned neuroeconomics, this idea of can we actually merge the fields of economics and the way people make decisions and in economic situations, and what is happening in the brain, the biochemistry of the brain, the electrical properties of the brain, and this combination of fMRI, being able to image brain activity live while a subject is going through the process of making an economic decision, is revealing how the brain works in a way that is just stunning. I mean, they have a way of diagnosing whether you're a conservative or a liberal, for example. Well, that sounds kind of ridiculous, but actually if you read the study, you understand how that works. And it's a little scary in a way that we can get in and understand people's decision-making process by starting to image the brain and its activity. It's far from, I would say, a complete functional understanding of those connections, but it's getting there. It's the first step. And very exciting. And if you think about how that applies to addiction and treatment of addiction, understanding what parts of the brain light up under certain situations, and what, essentially the first step toward understanding how to control it and how to treat it. And I think that's going to have huge impact. There's a lot of work going on in understanding the effect of education and stimulation of very young people, newborn and up, and that impact on the development of their brain. It's all these things that have very interesting scientifically, but have huge social implications, and that's becoming the theme of that Research Institute.
Now, one of your colleagues is also involved with Microsoft. I understand that there's a commercial that's going on right now.
That's right. Wu Feng is a computer scientist at Virginia Tech, and Microsoft came out and spent a few days on campus filming Wu and his team, and also Virginia Tech. And if you look at any TV at all, you'll see his commercials. And some of the short ones only have a mention of Virginia Tech, but the longer ones get into his work and applying cloud computing and high-performance computing to cancer research. And it's, again, another frontier that we're opening up, and we're really happy to be in the lead in those areas.
How would you rank Virginia Tech in terms of contributing to the economic environment in the region and also throughout the Commonwealth? Virginia
Tech, because of its land-grant mission, it really was, as I mentioned earlier, focused on economic development, and it has never left that path. And I think what is most relevant now is the need for economic development has become at the forefront. And I mean that in different ways. Regional economic development is a big push these days. So instead of defining a region by the city boundaries or by a state, we're looking now at regions that may encompass several governmental agencies and jurisdictions. And how do you cooperate across those boundaries and create a new economy in a region like that? So the experiment we're doing, and I call it an experiment, but the work we're doing in Roanoke is a great example, because we have the Hotel Roanoke there that Virginia Tech operates, and that's been there for a couple of decades. But we also have the Research Institute and the School of Medicine are new there. And just watching the contribution that Virginia Tech is making along with Carilion in building that economy up is, I think, an experiment in regional economic development. But across the state, we have a cooperative extension in every county. We have facilities in Arlington and Alexandria and Leesburg and Richmond and Southern Virginia, all over Virginia. And we're, in part, engaging that mission at every level we can. So across the state, in individual counties, but also in these regions that encompass maybe a few cities and towns that haven't been in the past cooperating together. We're there as a catalyst to help bridge those gaps and talk about things that will be important to the region. For Virginia Tech itself, we're in a small town, the small town of Blacksburg, a great community. Montgomery County is just fantastic, a great place to live. But it's small. It's a small economy. We've got the Corporate Research Center, which is helping to, I think, build that economy. A few thousand jobs there, and it's developed beautifully over the decades. But we're now recognizing that Montgomery County is in an economic zone with Roanoke. Mm-hmm. And we've got to work together with the Roanoke area as well. The Roanoke Valley and the New River Valley are really one, and we need to think about them as one. And then you come out to Arlington, where we've got a major research center. We're working with the city of Arlington as a living laboratory. So our faculty and our staff are embedded in Arlington's government, if you will, in terms of helping develop policy and looking at the resilience of that city. The resilience, financial, security, every component you can think of resilience, we're focused on that. And that's I think, a big frontier for land grants, is to move into this area of resilience. It's an almost unlimited scholarship zone, if you will. There's so many things you can look at, so many dimensions to resilience.
We've got about a minute left, but I wanted you to have the opportunity to talk about a subject of great interest here in Richmond this session. It has to do with campus violence, especially as that relates to women. And I know you think, as a fundamental matter, we need to change the culture.
That's right. I think that we are having this conversation about rules and laws and procedures, and it's a great conversation. I think we're moving forward in an interesting way that will be productive. But the real issue is, how do we change the culture? I was a college student in the 70s and a little bit in the 80s, and nothing really has changed. It's as if finally it's being opened up, and we're finally looking at, okay, what are these cultural issues that have persisted for decades? And so we're working on that. We've got a couple of campaigns going. No Hokies Left Behind is one of them, and this idea of watching out for one another and one another's safety. Several other areas that we can look at. We could talk for hours about it, but I'm encouraged about this opportunity to really address the cultural changes that need to be made with this generation.
Well, thank you for being here, Dr. Tim Sands, President of Virginia Tech.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching this special edition of Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.